Welcome to another Through the Bible. Today we're doing the book of Luke, the third gospel, but actually one of the earlier gospels. Maybe the second, if Mark is the earliest, we think. Luke is the third of the synoptic gospels. I didn't say that word very well. Synoptic. Everyone say synoptic. Synoptic. Now what does synoptic mean? What does synoptic mean? Raise your hand.
I don't know.
Chelsea.
Not a great definition, but they're in sync. Like
Yes.
They all match up.
Yes. Matthew, Mark, and Luke have a lot of similarities. Some sections are like word for word that we believe they copied, borrowed, in a like plagiarism. Or what are you claiming the Bible? We assume with permission.
Yeah.
But I don't remember the details of that well. Oh, look, Mark wrote it down well. Can I grab this, Mark, for my section?
Did they have study parties at Woods?
I doubt it. They were kind of scattered. They didn't have Woods coffee, or maybe coffee at all.
They could have just had coffee in the woods, though.
If they had coffee. So borrowing but they all bring their own unique flavor and direction and purpose to what they wrote. Luke is interesting. Matthew, eyewitness, disciple. Mark, not an eyewitness, probably a younger guy, but whose perspective was the main eyewitness of Mark. We talked about this a month ago. Anyone remember?
Who was Mark's main?
Who was Mark's main source?
Peter.
Peter, yes. So a lot from the perspective of Peter. That's pretty much well accepted. Luke, was Luke a disciple or an apostle? No. Was he an eyewitness to any of Jesus' miracles or any of Jesus' ministry?
Yes.
Probably.
I don't think so. It doesn't seem like that. So how did Luke write a book about stuff he never saw?
It was like the feeding the 5,000. Like there's a lot of people.
Maybe. Possible. Maybe he saw something. So how does one go about writing a story about something you weren't there for or never saw? What do? You ask people. You ask questions. Who do you ask?
People who saw it.
People who saw it, right. So you and you can actually get a greater, better perspective by compiling lots of people's testimony versus just one person's eyewitness testimony. Is that interesting? Does that make sense? Like if something happens and a bunch of people see it, like a news reporter, and they interview multiple different people, they compile one great account from all the different perspectives, right? Because not everybody was there for everything in Jesus' life, right? Not even all the disciples, not even Peter, James, John, who were there for some things. But, they weren't there for everything. They weren't there for the birth of Jesus, right? Some of them were younger than Jesus, so they weren't even alive. So, Luke is one of the most full accounts, and because it just has taken from a lot of different eyewitnesses' perspectives. Okay, the distinctions of Luke we like to talk about. It has a couple parables that no one else has. Specifically, two famous ones, the prodigal son and the good Samaritan. So,
Really? The prodigal son is only in this one?
only in Luke.
I didn't know that.
These are prominent, everybody knows ones. Like, secular culture knows about good Samaritans. It's the only one with the ascension written in. It's interesting. It is written as a two-part document, a two-part story. What is the second part of Luke?
It's on the board if you want to read it.
Acts, yes. Luke set out to write an account for a guy named Theophilus. We don't know who Theophilus was exactly, but he probably a Greek guy. That means not a Jew. And this is Luke is written towards a greater Greek Gentile audience. So it's Theophilus commissioned Luke to go and write and figure out what was all about this Jesus guy. And so Luke goes to write an acceptable, full account of everything that happened with Jesus and then the early church, right? So he compiles all this information, these events, And he writes it for Theophilus and then for a greater audience. It was spread around for lots of people to read. So a different audience than the other books, like Matthew was certainly written for Jews. It's why it had so many Old Testament references, connecting Jesus to prophecy. Luke is more written for a Gentile audience that maybe isn't as familiar with the Old Testament and stuff like that. Yes.
Luke is a Jew, right?
Yes, he was a Jew, but he wrote for a Jewish or a Gentile audience. I think Luke is a Jew. Is that right? That's confusing.
Theophilus is a Gentile.
I think so. I think that's what it is.
Luke says the thing in this
Yeah?
says Luke is a Gentile physician.
He's a Gentile? Oh, Luke is a Gentile. That's awesome.
Yeah, it
Thank
says
you,
that.
Riley.
He's a Greek. He says
He's a Greek, yeah.
A Gentile Christian.
That's great. Luke has a genealogy just like Matthew, but what's different about it?
Joseph and Mary, they're two different.
That's the theory, because there's some differences. There's some very similarities, like Abraham to David is exactly the same, but then it kind of goes differently. The one in Matthew follows the kingly line, and we think that's Joseph's actually birth line. Then the one that's in Luke, it doesn't say it explicitly, but it's different, so we assume that they're not contradicting each other and saying Joseph's line is different, but we're assuming that it's tracing it through Mary. And so that's why you see, like, because what if Jesus was only descended from David through Joseph? Why is that a problem?
Because Joseph is not Jesus' father.
Correct. Joseph is not Jesus' biological father, right? Joseph was not physically involved in Jesus' creation. Mary was physically involved, but it was a miraculous birth. So we assume that Jesus would have Mary's DNA. What would the other half of Jesus' DNA look like? That's my question. We don't know the answer.
It'd be
I have a theory.
Like Adam.
My theory, if you could figure this out. Yes, because God created Adam's DNA, right? So what if you did a DNA test on Jesus, looked like Mary was his mom and Adam was his dad, because
We should do this.
Jesus or God already had that DNA code.
And he's not creating
He doesn't-
all. Like he wouldn't have created new DNA.
I just think it's cool because Jesus is the new Adam, right? Like he's the perfect human, came to fulfill. There is nothing in the Bible to back this up except for that. But nothing we can't do the science. We'll have to ask
It's like
Jesus
a
in heaven.
conspiracy wall.
But anyway, it wouldn't have been Joseph's DNA, I don't think, because that would be
I should have a Bible.
wrong. Anyway,
Oh no, it's not conspiracy theory. It's like a fan theory.
it's fan fiction.
Fan fiction.
That's awesome. Anyway, Luke's is different, and we think it's Mary's line, connecting Mary in the line of David. So either way you slice it, if it's passed down, like last names are passed down through the father kind of thing. It wasn't actually till a couple centuries later, actually Jews tracked their line through the mother. So that wasn't true at this time. That's what I assumed, because that's true now for Jews. But either way, Jesus is solidly related in the line of King David. You can't deny it. It also goes back further. Matthew's genealogy only goes back to Abraham, which for Jews, that's the most important line, back to the father of the Jews. Where does Luke's genealogy go back to? All the way back to Adam. So, for a Gentile writing to a Gentile audience, this includes all people, right? You see why that's different? Not just Jews. You're going back to Abraham, you're just including Jews in Jesus' line. Luke includes all Gentiles and everyone in humanity back to related to Jesus, because in the weird way it goes all the way back to Adam. So pretty cool. Really good Christmas story in Luke. Probably the one we read in church, Luke 2, every year. Thank you, David Haggith, for your wonderful English accent.
Yes.
In the King's English. Luke 2 is the most famous, the governor had a census, all that. No room for him in the inn. So that's the census, Bethlehem, birth, shepherds, circumcision, Simeon, and Jesus at age 12 are unique to Luke. So who do you think Luke interviewed?
Mary.
I think he interviewed Mary because, like, where else would he have learned all this, right?
Didn't they have that in Chosen?
Yeah.
Mary's song.
Someone interviewed
No, they haven't showed Luke yet.
they.
They're showing John and Matthew. They were alluding to that John and Matthew in the Chosen. They're writing. They fast forward in time. Anyway, that's all unique to Luke. Because think about it, Matthew wasn't there, but he does connect to the wise men. Remember, Matthew's the only one with the wise men because that was connected to prophecy. Mark, written from Peter's perspective, has almost nothing of his birth, right? Because it's more of his one-person perspective. Luke, interviewing everybody, has the best Christmas story from the original, from interviewing Mary. We assume. Yes.
I had a question about your events, and you had 6-4 BC.
Yeah.
Can you explain that?
Let's go through. We'll get there. Let's go through. So we got Luke the physician. Genre is a historical epic.
Oh,
Okay.
epic.
It's a historical epic.
Oh, yes.
Luke was not an eyewitness. We also know that he was a companion to Paul, a co-worker and companion to the Apostle Paul, which is cool.
He was close friends with Paul.
Yeah, nice.
Nowadays
Close friends
we
with
say
Paul.
besties.
Yeah.
The audience, again, we talked about this, was Theophilus first, who commissioned this work, this to be written, because it costs money to travel around and interview people. Like, he couldn't work his job, but he's a physician, which means
Patience.
doctor.
They needed him.
Um,
No, I'm
so like we assume that Theophilus commissioned this work. That means paid for it. You know, I don't know if it took him a year or two to like interview all these people, maybe more, and then write it all down. Theophilus was the first audience, then the Gentile audience was the secondary, then everybody. When and where? So I said events, like just to remind us that the events happened. So Jesus' or Mary's pregnancy and the angel coming. The best guess on the date of Jesus' birth is actually 6-4 BC.
Mine says 6 to 5.
Okay, yeah. So thank you for that correction. We don't know, that's why it's a range, okay? It's actually not 1 AD. So when they started the dating system, that was like 300 years, 300 or 400, 500 years later, AD. And then they started a date, they guessed, they did their best. They were off a little bit because of new information we found. Based on, why can we date Jesus' birth? What other events? We're not just like, oh, we found the stable and
King Herod
his birth
dying.
certificate.
Or King Herod killing the kids.
Yes, there's great historical events. King Herod's death is part of it. And the census is the other big historical event that they found documentation on. What were you going to say, Nathaniel?
The census.
The census, yes. Sorry. The census was a big deal that happened and has a certain date attached to it. But we don't know it exactly still. 6-40 BC to 30 AD. Jesus was 33 when he died. And then it was written about 60 AD would have been when Luke penned it. So 30 years roughly after Jesus' death. And so are people still alive that remember these events 30 years later?
Yeah.
Some of them probably would have died, but a lot of Jesus' disciples were young, and Mary would have been pretty old by this point, right? So you got to think
Well, she was a young mom.
if she's a 15-year-old, she's 20 when Jesus, or 15 years,
So that makes her
20
75.
in 30 AD. Yeah, she would have been quite old at this time if she was an eyewitness that Luke interviewed, which we think is true. Yes.
Does that mean that it's actually like 20, 28, 30?
Is it right now actually 20? No, it's not actually 2030, but are we actually 20, 30, 2,000, 30 years away from Jesus' birth? Yes. That's what we think. But the dating system is set. We're not going to change the dating system just because they're slightly off on lining it up. They're even changing what they call it, right?
Yeah.
They're trying to disconnect it from Jesus' birth. So even though they know that this is likely not exactly 1 AD, the year Jesus was born, they're not going to fix it because they want to disconnect it from Jesus' birth at all. But the monks that came up with the dating system, which is a very good, reliable dating system, just got it a few years off when they.
Because you said it was multiple years from when it happened.
Yes, it was 400 or 500 years after
Right.
Jesus' birth that they established. Okay, it's year 400 because 400 years Jesus was born. They came up with that dating system later. It wasn't like Jesus is born, let's start the calendar over. Like Jesus was insignificant at that time, right? The only people who knew about it were Mary and Joseph and some shepherds, right? They were not, and then the wise men, I guess, a couple years later. Anyway, weird stuff. 60 AD. So that's when it was penned, written, approximately. Main characters. I just put Jesus down because it's all about Jesus. Of course, there's the disciples. There's Mary and Joseph. There's the shepherds. There's a lot of main characters you could put here. I
You
didn't
can
want
write
to hit
extras
it.
if you want.
These
I
are
have
and
Oh,
a
perfect.
lot more.
And a lot more.
Jesus and
Now,
Jesus plus
This is
Sarah.
important. I want to get to the purpose, and then we'll watch the through the Bible Project.
Wait, where did it take place?
Where? Oh, good point.
Where?
Oh,
Where?
Written in Rome.
Judea. Oh, written in Rome.
Mine says that.
Cool.
Or somewhere.
Where did the events? Yeah, let's tie that to the events. So written in Rome, but the events happened in Judea and Galilee, mainly Samaria, Israel. We'll say because of that whole region. But written in Rome. Thank you.
Yeah.
it's got
Purpose.
2 L's in the
All right.
middle.
What this book has a different purpose. Matthew showed that Jesus is the King of the Jews, right? He hit the prophecy hard and showed that he's the promised King. Mark wrote that. Wait, what did we put for Mark again?
Let's see.
What?
Purpose.
Purpose? We said focus on how Jesus is the Messiah.
Jesus is the Messiah, so he came to save us, right? Jesus, in Luke, the emphasis is on his humanity, that he is a human being. The Son of Man is a commonly used phrase over and over in Luke. It's in the other Gospels too, but mainly Jesus used that to describe himself. It's emphasized that he is a human. Why we talk so much about his human parents and his physical birth in Luke? Because they're bringing out this emphasis that he was physically human. He took on human flesh. This is what Jesus existed in: 100% humanity and 100% God at the same time. The hypostatic union. How will we ever understand 200% of being? I don't know. But it's like where people have debated forever, like, is Jesus human or is he God?
Oh, boom.
But how is he 90% human, 10% God?
100%
Like
both.
Hercules
Is this supposed
or
to say
whatever?
Christ as
So
the
1 plus 1
perfect
plus 1 plus 1.
human and savior, or what? Read that for me. It didn't make sense.
Where
Is
is it?
that an accurate account of the life of Christ and to present Christ?
As the perfect human and
Okay, so I
Savior.
had was. Okay.
Sorry.
Mine
Got
just says
So
Jesus.
the purpose here is to present an accurate account of the life of Christ, right? He went out to set. I'm going to talk to all the witnesses. I'm going to write this down, like a big full account of the life of Christ, and to present Christ as the perfect human and Savior, right? But his humanity is certainly emphasized, particularly compared to the other Gospels. So that's the main emphasis. All right, we're going to watch the Bible Project. I'm going to have to skip through a couple of it because it's... Sorry I had to skip around. It was a long one. You can go watch it. It's on YouTube if you want to watch the whole thing again. Luke is the book, from birth to death. It's all about Jesus. So, yes, Jesus is in the book. Question 7. It's always more interesting when it's not the gospel. But yes, Jesus is in the book. So I have up here a different outline was one out of my study Bible. It just kind of has birth and preparation, message of ministry of Jesus, and then his death and resurrection to end out the book. Simpler, but they have a different kind of outline guide. Our key verse, they mentioned it in the Bible Project as well, but 19:10, for the Son of Man, which is, a big emphasis on his humanity. Luke emphasized that statement, came to seek and save what was lost. So that's Jesus is coming to find, to seek, and save the lost, right? He's come to rescue us and to make a different way for our lives here on earth and our eternity. So that's his purpose. That's why he came. That's what Luke emphasized. He came as a human to save humans because he's God. Timeless truth. Is it up there?
Yeah, sorry.
Why do I have this timeless truth? Jesus is the perfect man.
Because this was the one that focused on him being perfect.
Yeah, focused on his humanity. But did Jesus have to be a perfect man to save us?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, we see over and over that the sacrificial lambs have to be without blemish, without spot. That was showing us that you can't just have any old lamb do it. Like, it has to be a perfect lamb, which also, they had to give their best. But it's someone who is not guilty can only pay the punishment, can only pay for the crime. So Jesus, it had to be Jesus. It couldn't be anyone else because we've all been stained with sin. We all have blemish and spots on us. Jesus was the perfect Savior. He had to be perfect to be able to pay for that, for all the sins of humanity that he didn't commit. Because he didn't commit any of them. He's the only non-guilty human. The only one not guilty of sin. The only one not guilty of sinning before God. The only one that deserved to be in heaven. And he made a way for everyone to be in heaven because he's perfect. So, that's the book of Luke. It's a good gospel. It's a pretty big whole gospel. But it's really cool to see how the 4 gospels are all necessary and work together. We're actually, in my family, we're reading... I have a harmony book which has all 4 gospels kind of lined up in parallel. But this time I have I'm reading a blended harmony, which takes all 4 gospels and kind of makes all the stories into one. So all the unique stories of every gospel, it's changed into one whole story. So it like blends all the 4 gospels. Now that's not how we should always read the gospels. It's interesting because they have their different purposes. It's not just, the details, as much of the details are important, but it's been pretty cool. And definitely thank you for adding John the Baptist, because Luke really gives that emphasis of his birth, the other ones don't. All right, that's it.
Bye.